What if a huge foundational story from the Bible all comes down to a simple misunderstanding? Today, we're diving into a really famous paradox from the book of Exodus. It boils down to one question. Did Moses see God's face or not? The answer? Well, it's not what you might think. Okay, so check this out. Right here, in this same exact chapter of Exodus, you get this massive contradiction. On one hand, the text says God spoke to Moses face to face, like a friend. That sounds super close, right? An unbelievable level of intimacy. But then, just a few verses later, God says, "You cannot see my face, for no one may see me and live." So, wait, which one is it? How can both possibly be true? I mean, how does that work? It seems like a flat-out contradiction. Was Moses just a special case? Was it all just a metaphor? Or is there something deeper going on here that we're missing? Let's dig in and try to solve this. All right, to crack this, we're not going to start with some super complex theology. No, the answer is actually hiding in plain sight. It's all about language. See, the argument here is that the key to this whole paradox is an ancient Hebrew idiom, one that's been misunderstood for a very, very long time. It turns out that the phrase, "to see the face," didn't always mean, literally seeing someone with your eyes. Back in the ancient world, it had a very specific and very different meaning. Let's take a look at the proof. Okay, clue number one. It actually comes from the same book, Exodus. Picture this. After the plague of darkness, Pharaoh is absolutely furious with Moses. He says, "Get out of my presence. See that you do not appear before me again." Now, the original Hebrew for "appear before me" is literally "see my face." But think about it. Was Pharaoh really worried about Moses looking at his nose or his eyes? Of course not. No way. What he was really saying was, "We're done. Our meetings are finished. Don't even try to get an audience with me again." He was kicking him out, cutting off all access to the royal court. And this isn't just a one-off thing. This pattern shows up elsewhere too. All right, let's jump over to another story, this time in Genesis. You've got Joseph, who's now this big shot ruler in Egypt, and he's talking to the very brothers who sold him into slavery years ago. He tells them, "You shall not see my face again unless your brother is with you." Now, here's the kicker. His brothers were standing right there, looking at his face when he said it. So obviously, it's not about physical sight. It's about access, about power. He was saying, "You are not getting an official audience with me again. Not until you bring me Benjamin." And just to really nail this down, let's look at one more. King David's son, Absalom, commits a terrible crime. David lets him come back to the city, Jerusalem, but he declares, "He is not to see my face." And get this, Absalom lived in the same city as his father for 2 whole years without seeing him. It was a formal banishment from his presence. So the pattern is crystal clear, right? To see the face wasn't about looking at somebody. It was a formal phrase, kind of like royal court language. It meant to be granted an audience or to be allowed in the presence of someone really important, like a king. And suddenly, with that little piece of information, our big paradox starts to just melt away. Okay, so part one of the puzzle seems solved. Seeing the face means having an audience. But that just leads to the next part of the story, which is maybe even weirder. Because God doesn't just say, "No, you can't have that kind of audience with me." He offers Moses something else instead, a really strange symbolic vision. So now that first verse makes total sense. When it says God spoke to Moses face to face, it meant Moses had this unique, direct line, a special audience with God that nobody else had. But then Moses asks for more. He wants to see God's actual glory. And that's when everything changes. God explains that seeing his face in that way, that raw, unfiltered, divine presence, is just too much for any human to handle. But he says, "I'll let you see my back." His back? What on earth could that mean? Well, this clearly isn't about divine anatomy. According to the source material, this was a deeply symbolic vision. I mean, think about it. If you see someone's back, what's happening? They're walking ahead of you, leaving you behind. This vision was actually a prophecy. It was a message about Moses' own future. God and his people were going to move forward into the promised land. But Moses, he was going to be left behind. Wow, left behind? But why? This is Moses we're talking about, their greatest leader. Well, the vision wasn't a punishment for something he'd already done. It was a foreshadowing, a glimpse into the future of a single, tragic mistake he was going to make under the crushing pressure of leadership. The reason for this absolutely heartbreaking destiny comes later in the story, in the book of Numbers. It all goes down at a place called Meribah. And it's just this incredibly powerful story about the weight of leadership and what happens in a moment of all too human weakness. Just try to put yourself in his shoes for a second. You spent decades leading these constantly complaining people through a desert. And now, here they are again, demanding water. God gives him a simple, elegant instruction. Just speak to the rock. But Moses, he's just worn down. He's at the end of his rope, and he snaps. He yells at the people, calls them rebels, and in this moment of pure frustration, he disobeys God. He hits the rock, twice. Sure, the water comes out, but something much more important was broken in that moment. And just like that, the prophecy was fulfilled. And so, at the age of 120, after 40 long years of carrying his people on his shoulders, Moses climbs a mountain, and from there, he gets to see it all, a panoramic view of the Promised Land. The land he sacrificed literally everything for. The one place he would never, ever set foot. The vision of seeing God's back, it came true in the most tragic way you can imagine. So let's zoom back out. What does this all mean when you put it together? Well, just by understanding one little ancient phrase, the whole story changes. It's not a weird physical puzzle anymore. It becomes this deeply symbolic and profoundly human story. So let's just recap. The so-called contradiction completely disappears when we get the language right. Seeing God's face means having a special audience. Seeing God's back was a prophecy about his destiny. The story transforms from being about a physical impossibility into a powerful symbolic message. It really becomes a story about leadership, about pressure, and about consequences. And you know, this whole idea of seeing God, being about something more than just physical sight, that's a theme you find in other places too. Take this verse from Matthew, for example. It suggests that being able to perceive God has always been more about what's going on inside you, in your heart, than what you're seeing with your eyes. And that really leaves us with one last big question. This entire epic story turned on the meaning of a single phrase. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many other foundational stories we think we know inside and out, might look completely different if we understood the original context and the language. What other secrets are hiding in plain sight?